Hi, everybody. I'm Clay Smith. I'm the literary director of the San Antonio Book Festival. Really thrilled to be here with one of the most exciting writers who is being published nowadays. She is moving from adult books into her first young adult title. So we're thrilled to host her for that here at the San Antonio Book Festival. So I want to encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand column of your screen. We will try to get as many of your questions answered by Charlie Jane as she can handle. And then I also wanted to encourage you to pre-order her new novel, Victories Greater Than Death, which is the first book in a new young adult trilogy, and that is the book we're going to be talking about today. So if you do pre-order today, and you can go to the link in Charlie Jane's session details page on our site. It's easy to find. Just click on that Buy the Books link. That supports Nowhere Bookshop, which is a new indie bookstore here in San Antonio. Indie bookstores have had a hard time during the pandemic, and your purchase also helps support this book festival, which is a nonprofit. And if you do order today, there are a few cool things you can get. Charlie Jane can tell us a little bit more about these, but you can get phone grips, art prints, and an enamel pin that says the galaxy is ours. And we're going to talk about that idea, why the galaxy is ours. So just encourage you to pre-order Victories Greater Than Death. Let me tell you a little bit about Charlie Jane, and then she and I will start talking. And as I said, we'll try to get all your questions answered. So Charlie Jane Anders, in addition to writing Victories Greater Than Death, is going to have a forthcoming short story collection titled Even Greater Mistakes. Her other books include The City in the Middle of the Night and All the Birds in the Sky. Her fiction and journalism have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Slate, McSweeney's, Esquire, Teen Vogue, Mother Jones, the Boston Review, Tor.com. There's basically not a publication in English on this planet that she has not written for. She has buys, and like the very nanosecond that a publication comes to life, she writes them and asks to write for them, and they say yes, apparently. So congrats to Charlie Jane for doing a lot of journalism in addition to fiction. Her TED Talk, Go Ahead, Dream About the Future, got 700,000 views in its first week. With Annalee Newitz, she co-hosts the podcast, Our Opinions Are Correct. Charlie Jane, I love the title of that podcast. I feel the same way. My opinions are correct. So I'm glad to see someone else feels the same way.
Yeah, I love that title too. That was all Annalee. Annalee came up with that title, and it's our opinions are correct. I mean, our opinions are tested by science. We actually have a device that we keep under our kitchen table that is, a scientific opinion analyzer, and we just feed our opinions in, and it goes boop, and according to science, you can't argue with science, right? So according to science,
yeah.
They've all been completely tested and proven. They're no longer even working hypotheses. They're hypotheses who've retired and gone to the coast and are drinking mimosas.
Yeah.
They're whatever working hypotheses do after they're they've already worked enough and they're just going to take some time off.
Yeah, they just spend their pension.
They're just exactly. They're like distinguished hypotheses of leisure is what they are.
Precisely.
Lots of mimosas. Just mimosas at all hours of the day. They don't even care.
That's right. So it seems appropriate. I would normally describe the novel we're talking about, but it's the beginning of a trilogy. The novel is coming out on Tuesday. It seems appropriate to ask you to introduce it. It's the first of a trilogy. Tell us a little bit about Victories Greater Than Death. Where is it set? What happens? All that good stuff.
Yeah, so Victories Greater Than Death is about a girl named Tina. She's about 16 years old, I guess, and she, maybe 17. I forget exactly what we say in the book. Sorry. Anyway, she is the clone of an alien hero who was left on Earth as a baby, basically disguised as a human. Basically, this alien hero died, and they were like, we can't let this beloved figure who's been an inspiration to us die. So they clone her and put her adult consciousness into this newly cloned baby, and then hide the baby on Earth disguised as a human. But because a baby can't process all the memories of an adult, she doesn't have access to her memories of her previous life until she's old enough. And when she's old enough, the aliens will come and get her and take her away from this planet. And
Mhm.
so she's just been waiting. Like, she found out on her 12th birthday that she's actually really an alien and that she doesn't really belong on Earth. And she always kind of suspected that based on various
Mhm.
things. Based on, I mean, I often suspect that about myself. And so she has just been waiting for the aliens to come get her. She's just like, I want to go into the universe and be a hero and save people and make a difference and be awesome and embrace my destiny. And she's just waiting for this to happen. And then finally the aliens come to get her and her best friend, Rachel. And nothing is quite what she was expecting. It's a lot harder. Um, her destiny doesn't just fall into her lap the way she was sort of expecting it would. And, saving the galaxy turns out to be a really tough challenge, and the galaxy needs a lot of saving. And so it's kind of a fast-paced, exciting, fun space adventure. It's very much inspired by like Guardians of the Galaxy, but also Star Trek and Star Wars, and a lot of Steven Universe and She-Ra and various other recent stuff that I've just been loving. So it's basically just like my tribute to the fun, exciting, just emotionally charged space operas that I grew up loving.
Yeah, it is really fun, and there is a lot that happens in it. I mean, is that why you moved to YA? I mean, you've had success as an adult writer. Um, Tell me about why you chose sort of YA for this trilogy.
I think you're absolutely right that it is about the fun. I think,
Mhm.
part of why I decided, oh, I really like to write a YA now is because I was noticing that a lot of the most fun books I was reading were YA books. And, I feel like, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I started to see a lot more books coming out in YA that were just like really entertaining action adventure books. Like everything Lee Bardugo was putting out, but also
Mhm.
Warcross by Marie Lu, and
Mhm.
just a host of other books that were coming out. Want by Cindy Pon came out around that time, I think. There were a lot of books that were just like a fun caper or a fun adventure, and there'd be like a heist story, or there'd be just like, we've got to go get this thing and save a bunch of people. It was just like really exciting, fast-paced adventures. Seemed to be like what was becoming the norm in YA. And I was like, I really want to write a fun, fast-paced adventure with a lot of feels. I don't want to write a fast-paced adventure where it's just like people grimacing at each other for 300 pages. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love a good grimace, but I wanted fast-paced adventure with feels and with friendship and relationships and emotional journeys. And I felt like YA was where a lot of that best stuff in that mode was happening. So I
Mhm.
was just, and then I started to think about the kind of book that I wish I could write, and that's kind of where this came out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, there is so much receptivity, I guess. Like some YA editors seem willing to try new things in a way that maybe in the adult side of the publishing industry is not quite as open to that experimentation and the fun, you know? So, I mean, certainly we have comedic novels and that are meant for adults,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
but it's not that the adult world is totally dour and lack of
No,
fun,
no, no.
but there is something about YA that you know, it's just expected that you have fun, and that's such a nice place for a writer to be in. And I assume at one time you'll move back to adult, and that will be nice for you to shuttle back and forth between the two of them. Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I have an adult novel that I've been working on for the past year, which I'm hopefully
Yeah.
gonna be sending to my agent soon. I'm just, I like to tinker a lot, so that's actually coming. So there'll be more adult
Okay.
novels. I've got a few that I'm really dying to write. Anyway, sorry, go on, please.
Yeah. Well, you're sort of prolific. I mean, do you have a writing schedule like every day from a certain time or something?
I mean, I had a schedule before the pandemic, and it was like so many other things, everything was turned upside down. I had a routine, and it kind of went out the window. My schedule lately is just whenever I get time, I just kind of try to glue myself to my chair and do as much writing as I can. And I actually, part of what I did during the pandemic that kind of saved me from like, despair and from lack of productivity is I kind of cooked up a new writing routine for a good while, which was I would kind of work during the day on the young adult book, sitting at my desk, at my computer. I like to have like different places and different times and different kind of situations where I write. I feel like that helps to keep me going. So I would write at my desk on my computer for the young adult. I would work on my essays that I was writing last year, mostly on my phone, actually. I worked on them a lot on my
Oh,
phone,
wow.
a lot like using text
Mm-hmm.
to speech. I was just walking around. And then
Mm-hmm.
I would work on my adult novel in bed with a blank notebook and a pen at night. And so I would just sit in bed with a notebook and pen and just scribble for like an hour or two until I conked out. And I got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
writing done that way and in little notebooks, which I now have to transcribe. But so that was just a way to keep it like, one of my challenges with writing is always just like keeping it kind of like feeling like, yeah, I'm not just sitting in the same spot for 12 hours a day, kind of staring at a blank
Yeah.
screen, so that I've got like different stuff that I'm doing in different places. So
Yeah.
it's always a moving target.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Um, and so speaking about having fun writing this novel, the battle scenes are pretty awesome. How much fun did you have writing those? Tell us about writing those.
Yeah, I mean, so, like I said, this is a really fast-paced space opera, space adventure in the mold of Star Wars, Guardians of the Galaxy, Star Trek, all this other stuff. And so I was like, okay, there have to be space battles. Like there's gonna be, giant starships like wailing on each other. And really, I thought I had a lot of fun writing them. I also worked really hard to come up with battle scenes that were not just like a replay of battle scenes I'd
Mm-hmm.
seen elsewhere, and that kind of felt logistically and kind of tactically interesting to me. Like
Mm-hmm.
where when it got to be fun was when I made it very specific, which I think in general part of the process of writing is going from like vague to specific in a way. I've never
Mm-hmm.
put it that way before, but that makes a lot of sense to me. Like you start out with like, okay, there's a battle, people are shooting each other, or okay, there's a scene, people are talking at each other, and you drill down until you get something that's very specific, that has specific circumstances that are you know that kind of make sense in the context of the story, and that kind of provide the kind of the bounds of what's happening. So, for example, early on in the novel, I think this ended up getting trimmed quite a bit because we, again, fast paced. But so early on in the novel, the starship that has come to get our hero, Tina, is in orbit around Earth. And basically, they're already badly damaged. And they are using all of the space junk in orbit around Earth, which, by the way, there's a lot of space junk. We pretty much just passed the milestone of having like the entire planet covered by space junk like earlier this year. So they're using all the garbage in orbit around our planet, all the like trashed satellites and things, to hide
I think you
themselves
actually
from
call
other
the
starships.
interior of the ship greasy.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's a grungy world. It's a grungy world.
Yeah.
So, but they're using the junk in orbit around the planet to hide from the other starship, which is trying to destroy them. And they're kind of playing cat and mouse by hiding in space junk. And then, they have to run for it. And so I tried to really think about the logistics of this and like the kind of cat and
Mm-hmm.
mouse game of it, and the kind of like, how are these ships able to see each other? How can they hide from each other? Like what kind of like there's a lot that I didn't include in the novel because it was too much detail about like exactly how they're able to spot another ship. Like I think I describe it as space farts or something, like if there's radiation leakage or if there's like a little heat signature that's like out of place. Basically, I actually spent a lot of time Googling and talking to science people and people who love military science fiction about this. And I also asked on Twitter, like, what are your favorite space battles? What's a space battle that's really has a lot of ingenuity? And I got like 300 responses, of course. And a lot of them were, things like, okay, Galaxy Quest, where, at the end, sorry, I'm going to spoil the ending of a Galaxy Quest for anybody. It's your fault. You should have seen that movie already. It's an amazing movie. But at the end, when God, now I'm blanking on his name, when the main character is like, we're dragging minds, which I'm not doing justice to that moment at all. It's such a beautiful moment. And like Wrath of Khan, where they're kind of playing cat and mouse inside a nebula. And I was watching a lot of this one show called The Last Ship, which is a show that had a lot of issues, but it did naval combat so beautifully. Like all of any scene, any moment in that ship, in that show where two ships are trying to destroy each other is just beautiful. It's, you can just skip everything that's not a battle scene in that show, and you'll just be so happy because they really do naval combat so well in the last ship. So I sort of
Yeah.
just tried to steep myself in that stuff. Anyway, that was a long answer. I apologize.
No,
I get
I
excited
think
talking
you're,
about space battles.
yeah. Well, I didn't expect you to be excited by military strategy and naval history, but it's fascinating to know because you can tell, and when you read the novel, that there's real, depth and specificity to how those battles are sort of laid out by you. So that's nice to know. So I want to ask you, a lot of the characters in this novel have to find their own ways of just sort of being in the world, and they get punished for being misfits. There's a period in this novel, as you said in the beginning, that happens on Earth, and then, quite literally, our two lead characters at that point are whisked off to this spaceship. It's Tina. I don't think this is giving anything away. Tina and her best friend on Earth, Rachel, and
That's
they're
yeah.
yeah, they're taken to this spaceship. Uh, and Tina, just in the pages that she's in the beginning, is really fascinating because she isn't afraid to express her need for time alone. She's like a super introvert, and at school, at high school, she's bullied for it. Um, but I was sort of touched by the ways that the characters in your novel do express their vulnerability, when I think that a lot of us are afraid to admit that we're afraid. Um, so, and it just felt to me like you wanted to provide a little shelter or respite in this novel for your characters, and maybe for your readers who feel like they don't fit in. Is that a fair assessment?
That's absolutely a fair assessment. And, I mean, I think there's definitely a theme in my work. If you go back to All the Birds in the Sky and The City in the Middle of the Night, and pretty much a lot of my stories is like a theme of misfits and people who
Mhm.
feel kind of misunderstood by the world and kind of misidentified by the world. And, obviously I have had experiences of my own that kind of lead me in that direction. We could be here all day talking about those, but it's a theme that speaks to me really powerfully, and it's a theme that I'm just like, that I'm kind of obsessed with, obviously. And so it's just, I feel like for me, I definitely, with this novel, I wanted to be a little kind of nurturing about it. Like, kind of, it's an adventure novel, so there's danger, but there's also, I wanted to be, there's danger, but there's friendship, and there's people being there for each other. And honestly, I feel like oftentimes with my work, there's one relationship that I kind of put at the center, and then everything else kind of is built around that, almost like, you have like a core, and then you kind of build like layers around the core. And for me in this novel, it's definitely the relationship between Tina and Rachel. And
Mhm.
the fact that they've known each other for a long time when the novel begins kind of lets you short circuit some of that, like misunderstanding that might happen between two characters. And then Tina and Rachel, through their bond, build, like, basically Rachel mostly builds something that the other characters are able to be a part of, where they can be
Mhm.
vulnerable with each other. And, I mean, I've been accused of like torturing my characters a little bit. Like, I was actually surprised when All the Birds in the Sky came out. People were actually a little bit traumatized by the childhood stuff that Patricia and Lawrence have to go through in the first like 100 pages of All the Birds in the Sky, which I thought was like, well, that's just childhood. And like people were like, no, this was really grueling and brutal. So I was very mindful of that this time. And it's no accident that I was writing Victories Greater Than Death during a time when we were all traumatized. We were all extremely traumatized. I started really working on it in earnest in early 2017. I had kind of been working on it
Mhm.
as like on the back burner a lot during 2016. And it was just like, okay, we are all extremely traumatized, and scary, horrible stuff is going on. And I really want this book to be like full of people being there for each other and full of people supporting each other. And it's not, I don't think it's a sappy novel, but it's a novel that's like, it's very much influenced actually by Becky Chambers, who I was reading a lot of, and
Mhm.
I love all of her books. And Becky Chambers does this thing super well of people really just like being a family and supporting each other and being, kind to each other and
Mhm.
having their problems and having their disagreements and their flaws, but still being kind. And I felt like that was a thing that I really wanted to include in this book, especially for kids and especially right now.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's sappy, but tender or comforting are adjectives that I think of for this one. Um,
Yeah.
but
I
it,
feel like there's a genre called comfort core. We need comfort core right now?
yeah.
Sorry,
Well, it is
I
so
just jumped in
fascinating
there.
the ways that political fear or political trauma find finds its way into novels that aren't overtly political. You know, um, and in this case, that manifests as you sort of providing a space where your characters feel they can be vulnerable and be safe. So
Yeah.
political fear has deep fictional ramifications. Let's say. Um, so you referenced this a little bit when you earlier in the event, but Tina, who again is sort of a clone of a once powerful alien who has been placed on Earth as a baby, and she has a human mother. And at some point early in this novel, she is taken up to space to sort of resume her identity, I guess you could say. And tell me if I'm not pronouncing this correctly, but Captain Tau Argentian.
I pronounce it Thou Argentian,
Ah,
but yeah.
okay, yeah. And so Tina's literally like whisked up into space with her best friend Rachel. And it just struck me that that is kind of like the dream scenario for a lot of teens, or maybe even a lot of adults who feel, that this world wasn't really made for them. And I wondered if you felt that way as a teen, if this novel is some kind of like latter day wish fulfillment for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I've talked a lot about this lately. When I was a kid, as I said, there's a lot of reasons why I kind of identify with misfits. When I was a kid, I had a really severe learning disability. I was kind of like, I think noticeably queer, and I was like a nerdy kid who was terrible at school,
Mhm.
and which is a bad combination. Like it's, if you're going to be nerdy, you should at least be good at school.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know. There's no should, but there'd be nice to be having some payoff for being a nerdy weirdo.
All right.
And I was just in my own head all the time. I used to just like kind of a lot of my most powerful memories of my childhood are just kind of wandering around the very edges of the schoolyard, like right by the kind of chicken
Mhm.
wire fence at the boundaries of the schoolyard during recess while everybody else was playing. And I'd just be in my own head, kind of making up stories about monsters and superheroes and like, just random weird stories in my head and just getting lost in my own fictional worlds. And I absolutely desperately wanted a starship to just swoop down out of the sky and just come and get me and like, have aliens show up and be like, yeah, actually you belong with us. And even though the way it's depicted in the first Guardians of the Galaxy is not very like, it's not great, like where Peter Quill gets like scooped up by a spaceship. Obviously there it's like his mom has just died and the aliens who capture him say they're going to eat him. So it's not exactly the ideal scenario, but still I was like, yes, that is what I wanted. That is exactly what I wish would have happened to me. And, I actually wrote an essay a few years ago, which I linked to in my Twitter recently about like how this one year when I was really, really heavily bullied and kind of like feeling just like the end of my rope, the thing that kept me going was this Japanese animation show, this anime show called Space Battleship Yamato or Star Blazers in English that I can still sing the tune to from memory. I'm not going to do it because, I don't want to upset anybody with my terrible singing, but, you know, it's just, it's been a fantasy event. In fact, I'll just, one more thing really quickly. Um, the original opening of All the Birds in the Sky, instead of Lawrence going off to watch a rocket launch, which is what happens in the version of the book that was published, the first draft, Lawrence goes to find some aliens to tell them, please take me away from this planet. And like somehow he finds out where there's some aliens hiding on Earth. And he goes to their secret hideout, which is disguised as a store that only sells lentils and like riding pants It's called jodhpurs and jodhpurs because those are two kinds of jodhpurs, like lentils and writing pans. That's the only thing the store sells is things called jodhpurs. And it's really secretly a front for aliens. Shockingly, a
Mhm.
store like that is not actually very profitable,
Yeah.
but it's just a hiding place for these aliens. And so he goes to them and says, "Please take me away from this planet." And they're like, "No, you have to do something for us first." And that would have been a very different novel. But so it's been a thing that's been on my mind for a very long time.
Yeah. No, it's nice to read about it. So, um, I'm sure you've had lots of ideas for novels or certainly trilogies, um, but a trilogy, you're making a commitment to your publisher, to your editor, like you got to turn in 3 books. So, what are the different things, the different elements that have to come together for you to feel like, oh, I do actually want to spend, several years, if not more than that, in this world and writing about this?
I mean, what I always say in general about everything to do with like writing is if, the thing that keeps me writing is the same thing that keeps me reading, which is curiosity. Like I want to see where this is going. I want to see what happens next. I'm like, "Ooh, there's some surprises here. Oh, I didn't see that coming." And in the case of the YA, I should add that I've been much more like of a stickler for like outlining than I had been in the past, like with my adult novels, because there's a lot of plot in this
Mhm.
YA trilogy, and I don't want to get to like the final 100 pages of the third book and be like, "Oh, that thing I said in the first book, actually that was wrong, and it's too late because the first book's already published." And like, "Oh, now I have to write my way out of this thing that I set up in the first book." I had to like at least kind of know where the story was going so that I didn't, embarrass myself any more than I normally do. So,
Right.
you know, um, but I think that part of why, like I said earlier, that this adult novel, my agent is like probably wondering where the heck it is because I told him he was going to get it a while ago, and part of why I'm always a little gun shy about like actually going ahead and selling a project or giving a project to my agent and hopefully after that my publisher, unless my agent looks at it and is like, "No, we're not giving this to your publisher." um, but part of why I'm a little gun shy is because I want to be just like sure in my own heart that I am willing to like make a life commitment to something before I sign a contract saying I'm going to make a life. It's like getting married in a weird way. Like I wrote an
Mhm.
essay a while ago saying that when you start a story, it's like going on a first date. You go on a first date and it's like, "Ooh, shiny new story idea." Like, "Oh, you're really attractive." "Oh, we're having some really interesting interactions at first." But then maybe the second or third date, you're like, "Wow, this story idea that I thought was super attractive and like fascinating is actually kind of like a little bit of a dud." And, I wish
Mhm.
I could just like, call a lift right now and get out of this date that I'm on with this story idea. Um, I, you'll notice that like all the ways I describe dating is like very clunky because like I've been living in a cave for the last year and a half or the last year and a few months. So
Yeah.
I'm like, what do people do in the real world? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, so basically, I want to make sure I want to like kick the tires before I know that I'm ready to commit to something.
Yeah.
And like
No, it's wise. I
Victories
mean,
Greater Than Death, I wrote 40,000 words of it before I sold it. Like I was like,
oh,
I want to know.
mhm. Yeah. Well, that's a smart way to, you know, that's a lot of words. That's a smart way to know you want to write two more of them. Um, and it is so impressive as someone like me who looks at the whole publishing scene, adult and children's, that, there are so many series in middle grade and YA, and there's far fewer in the adult world, and the middle grade and YA writers are able to commit to long series. Don't forget to place your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get them answered. So I want to ask about the alien characters in this novel. First of all, there are a lot of them. They're all different. Your imagination is on fire. So I want you to talk about that. But what I really want to ask about them is just that, in the novel, when they introduce themselves, they say their name and then they say the pronoun they prefer to be called by. But in the Earth scenes, that doesn't really happen. And one character calls Earth a quote primitive planet. Just tell me a little bit about your thinking in creating that custom for the space characters.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I can't remember how that came to be a part of this book, and like I wish I could remember. Like it was like probably in 2017 that I came up with that idea. And basically, it's just like, okay, aliens show up, you can understand their language, and like there's like a lot of aliens in this book, and a lot of very different kinds of people that we meet from other planets, and everybody can understand each other. And like actually, I'm as a side note, I'm very obsessed with this idea of like a universal translator where you can speak any other language. I wish I had one. It would come in very handy a lot of the time. But also, when you think about languages and how weird they are and how hard it is sometimes for someone from the United States to understand someone from Ireland who we're ostensibly speaking the same language, but I have a lot of American friends who are like, I can't watch certain British or Irish TV shows without subtitles because the accent is too hard for me to understand, you know, and it's like, and the slang is different and a lot of words are different, and it's lorry versus truck, and I don't know. So, when you think about like being able to understand a language from someone from a very different planet, it's gonna, that's a huge tall order. So I'm like, okay, how would that work? Obviously, it is to some extent reading your mind and taking your thoughts and translating them into like the thoughts that you're intending to speak, not just your random thoughts. It won't just translate like if you're thinking, wow, this person is a jerk. It's not going to translate that unless you intended to say it. Like obviously. But so it's translating your kind of verbalized thoughts into whatever language the person who's listening speaks. And so I was like, well, if you can do that, why wouldn't you be able to make sure that everybody gets everybody else's pronoun right? Because that seems like the next step. Like if you want to prevent misunderstandings, getting someone's pronoun wrong is a pretty big misunderstanding. Like it's a misunderstanding of the person, of the nature of the person you're dealing with. And so we're going to, we should really, there should be a fix for that. And I'm very careful to say in the first book, like I think Yato the Mantha tells Elza or tells somebody that not everybody hears the pronouns spoken out loud. Like Tina hears it spoken out loud because that's how Tina's brain works and because Tina is speaking English. And so it just makes sense for Tina to be like, to hear people saying, I'm blah and my pronoun is blah. In the second book, especially when we're dealing with people who the characters have already met before, for some viewpoint characters, we just get, when we first meet the person, we just get their name and then their pronouns in parentheses. But no matter what, basically the main idea is that the translator will not let you get someone's pronouns wrong. Like even if you, I clarify in the second book that even if you intend to misgender someone on purpose, like even if you are trying to use the wrong pronoun for someone, the translator will just correct it before anybody else hears it, because clearly this is a misunderstanding that needs to be corrected. So it's actually impossible to do that, which I think is like a utopian idea. And I think part of what I love about these kinds of stories, like Star Trek, is that we can imagine like a better world. So that's the thing that I was like very passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a nice idea, that this idea of a novel being able to sort of set up its own utopia, the way that the moral system works in that novel. Because, the bigger idea with this, the introduction of the pronouns that your alien characters do, is if we take a step back, it sort of points us to this idea of the novel as a place for moral education or moral insight. That readers can learn a better vision for how the world could be. And I think for a very long time in literary history, there was just a natural understanding that novels can illuminate morality and show people the way to be. But, that thinking has somewhat gone out of fashion, I think. But there are YA novels that don't shy away from sharing moral insights. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about that, about the novel as morality,
Yeah, I mean, I think just as any work of fiction is inherently political, like we talked earlier about like novels that are kind of more explicitly political versus novels that are more, I guess, implicitly political. But I think every novel is political in its own way and has like a political viewpoint. And a lot of that does kind of come back to morality and trying to be a good person. I think that, actually the idea of comfort and comfort core, which I'm now excited to have like coined a new genre. I don't know. Maybe someone else already came up with that. But the idea of comfort core is, I think part of what's comforting, like when you read, for example, okay, Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett is a novelist who is, willing to kind of share his thoughts about like the way the world works and the way the world should work. And there's something kind of comforting about a narrator or an author who is willing to just be like, you know, people should be like, it's like when a lot of people's favorite quotes from Vonnegut are things like, you got to be kind, damn it,
Mhm.
I forget, damn it, you got to be kind. I think that, authors who kind of like are discursive in that way and maybe a little bit didactic, like that's also why people love Heinlein, I think. Um, that sense of like, yes, we are going to actually talk about the meaning of life a little bit. And
Mhm.
that's actually a comforting thing because it's like, it's a friendly thing. It's friendly when an author is like sharing kind of thoughts about goodness with you. And the other thing I just want to say really quickly is, that theme of identity that we talked about, like of the misfit who is trying to find where they belong, trying to find who they really are. Lately I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of like not just who am I, but, if I do X, Y, and Z, what does that make me? Like when you're questioning your actions or questioning your choices, part of what you're questioning is like, what kind of person does this make me? And how do I be a good person? Like one of my touchstones as a writer, as a reader, is actually the novel Piers Plowman, which is kind of a deep cut at this point. It's like one of those medieval morality tales. And it's all about like a quest, a metaphysical quest to be a good person. And like this person is searching for like do good, do best, and like basically trying to find the ways of being a good person and being the best person. And, because that's really the only quest worth undertaking in a way is the quest to be a good person, which is also the quest that never stops, unfortunately.
Right, right. So speaking of that, let's talk about Tina's hero complex,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe hero issues is better. What I don't know which term you prefer, but Tina starts on Earth. As we said, she is whisked up into space to take on her role as the captain. And as the captain, she feels like she needs to sort of take on the world and all of its problems and solve all those problems. She has to learn to sort of rely on other people, right? What, why do you think she feels like she has to solve all the world's problems?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was wanting to kind of think about like that idea of like the hero who, is going to save everybody and like the savior, I guess, like this a little bit of a savior complex, in fact. And,
Mhm.
the idea of the kind of the chosen one a little bit, like, which is something that we've all been thinking about lately, because so many of our stories, our fantasy stories, especially, are chosen one stories about like the one savior, like Luke Skywalker or, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who is like selected kind of to be our savior and who is like marked by fate or whatever. And, in the case of Tina, I wanted to kind of like make it a little bit messy, but also, there are strands that are kind of tangled together in there. And one of the strands is that I think Tina is a genuinely kind and good person who, for example, at her high school, really hates bullies, hates like injustice whenever she sees it, and she has to stand up to bullies. It's in her nature. And sometimes she stands up to bullies when maybe she shouldn't, like she's fighting other people's battles for them in a way that maybe is not good for anybody. And that's the thing that
Mhm.
earlier drafts of the book kind of got into more, but I wanted to get Tina off Earth as fast as I could. So we kind of glimpse that more than we see it, I think. And like, but Tina also on Earth is doing these pranks on like, creeps and bullies. She's part of this group that is doing these like kind of like silly but, kind of political pranks against like men's rights activists and like
Mhm.
predatory lenders and various other people in her town and in the neighboring towns, just because she's somebody who, even if she never left this planet, even if she was never singled out for greatness, she would want to be fighting the good fight in some way, which is something that I really identify with. And I think, I'm very grateful that younger people right now have like taken this attitude to things like gun violence and climate change, that we are not going to just sit there and let our political leaders kind of dither endlessly about these
Hmm.
huge epistemic crises that we're facing, these huge, like, you know, life or death situations that the entire planet, or especially, here in the United States, that we're grappling with, and Black Lives Matter, and like, you know, just trans rights and so many other issues that really need to be addressed. So,
Hmm.
but I did want to kind of have that like impulse to do good and help people, be kind of tangled up with Tina, really wanting to be like special and wanting to be like kind of, even before she knows, even before she found out when she was 12 that she's like this epic hero, and that, this destiny is waiting for her. But I think there's something in her that is just intrinsically also attracted to that is the idea of like, I'm going to be the savior, I'm going to save everybody. And part of her arc in this book is definitely going from like, whenever there's a bad situation, basically telling the other human kids, and to some extent all the characters, get behind me, I'll protect you, I'm going to handle this. Basically like, you're just like my sidekicks, or you're kind of, you know, you're the sidekicks, I'm the main hero, kind of is the dynamic a little
Yeah.
bit. You're realizing by the end of the book that she needs to be part of a group, a part of a team, part of a family, and that she really can't be calling the shots, even though she knows stuff that some of the other characters don't know. There are other characters who are resourceful and who can be, who can do a lot to help. And so getting away from that savior complex is like a huge part of Tina's arc in the book, and her realizing that there's a cost to it. So anyway, I know that we're running out
Hmm.
of time and we have questions and stuff, so I'm going to stop nattering.
Yeah. Well, you also, I want to say how much fun you had with names, because that the men's right advocate who your characters are protesting against is named Monday Barker, and one of the, I guess, species of alien in your novel has the last name of the Montha, Monntha. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So if
Yeah,
you
yeah, so
if you say
Monica.
that, yeah, it almost sounds like a child who can't articulate their R's or S's saying monster. So the way
Oh, wow. Okay. Huh. That's funny. I mean, I kind of love that. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah.
so,
Monday Barker. Monday Barker, I kind of regretted choosing that name for him, because then every time I mentioned his name, I had to be very clear that it's not like something's happening on Monday and there's a Barker. Like, I like had to be very careful how I constructed any sentence that his name appeared in, because it's
yeah,
confusing. But I love that name because it's just such a, I don't know.
yeah,
Obviously, again, I was working out a lot in 2017, and there were, that was the era when we were really kind of like confronting this like men's right activist, you know,
yeah,
complex that was happening.
yeah, for sure. So Megan wants to know, is there a universal translator autocorrect in any other aspects? Pronouns is a pretty straightforward thing that a translator could understand and correct, but if it can do that, then it makes me curious if there's anything else a universal translator might try to correct. And you said you're obsessed with universal translators, so maybe you have thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, the way I've set it up in this trilogy is that the universal translator, the every speak, you know, pronouns is the only thing currently that it tries to correct, or that it tries to like avoid any kind of misapprehensions in. In general, because languages are so slippery, and so like even two speakers of the same language often don't understand each other completely. I kind of, part of what I was really obsessed with, that I poke at in the first book and I poke at it some more in the second book, is, the limits of a universal translator, because every language has words that do not have an exact match in another language. And for the purposes of this trilogy, I actually learned Portuguese from basically from scratch,
Oh,
because one of the main characters in the book is from Brazil, and I wanted to just learn Portuguese and spend a lot of time talking to people from Brazil, to especially my friend Haley, who's been helping me so much with these books. Like, she's my sensitivity reader and my advisor and my Portuguese teacher and a million other things. She's amazing. So I was like, there are words in Portuguese that don't have an exact match in English. There are false cognates between Portuguese and English. So there are going to be words that like people are going to not quite get. Either they're just going to get them as like an undigested, like when you're speaking English and you suddenly say, you know, a French word or a Chinese word in the middle of a sentence, and it just is sitting there as as a word in another language. And sometimes it'll be translated, but it's not quite right. And so those edge cases, the little edges where the translator doesn't entirely completely work perfectly, was a thing that I really wanted to kind of explore and kind of keep an eye on. And it's a thing that becomes even more important in the third book, because I think communication is like the heart of a lot of our problems and a lot of our potential, in terms of meeting other cultures. And so it's a thing that I kind of, in a way, that the series kind of becomes about, I think, by the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah. Well, we've got to leave it there, but I just want to say again, to encourage people to pre-order Charlie Jane's novel. You get a bunch of cool stuff if you pre-order it today from Nowhere Bookshop. Thank you so much to Charlie Jane for being a part of the festival, and to you all for attending. And thanks, Charlie Jane.
Hey, thank you so much. Support Nowhere Bookstore, and thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah.